If you're wondering how your Google ads are doing, here are 4 tests that I go through to see if they're working and how well they're working. I found or created these after working with clients, and so I'm sharing them here, and hopefully they're helpful and useful for you too. By the way, my name's Gavin, and basically my goal is to help chiropractors with the business side of things so that they can focus on being doctors. Let's jump in. Okay, so this first test is to see if your ads are working, and it's super simple. What we're going to do is we're going to go to your Google Ads dashboard, and we're going to go to your time selector over here, and we're just going to click all time, and you're going to go see whenever you first started running ads at the very beginning, and you're going to go note this down. Then what we're going to do is you're going to jump in your EHR. As an example, in JNAP, this is the EHR that most of my clients use. This is just the demo clinic, but you can see here we have new patients and returning patients. And so you would just go back to whatever date range you first started Google Ads. I would go through the first couple of months and get kind of a feel on average of how many patients you're seeing, both returning and new. And then I would go to the months after you turn on Google Ads and do the exact same thing. And this is, again, what I do with clients to kind of see how well our advertising is working. After you turn on Google Ads, what I always look at is both new and returning, because it's possible that some of the returning patients might just not have seen you in a while, and then their ads or your ads kind of reminded them that you exist and they should come in for care. And if we see that new patients and or returning patients are up and appointments, that's another one you might want to look at, then we have reasonable expectation that our Google ads are in fact working. Now, if you've changed a lot of stuff or implemented a ton of new things since you started Google ads, then it might kind of muddy some of the statistics. For instance, let's say you started Google ads and then a month later you started Facebook ads. If you only have that 1 month of Google ads, it's that's not very much data to be able to tell whether or not your Google ads are doing anything compared to just your Facebook ads. Another thing is the Google ads might be working, but you might just not be able to get people all the way into becoming a patient. And so that's another thing to look at, is the ads might be getting calls, for instance, but then people just might not be coming in all the way. And so that's what this next test is for. And so the next test, I prefer doing smart campaigns and then gearing towards calls on Google ads. I just think it tends to be the best outcome, just kind of the most efficient process. And so that's what I gear towards. And so in this example, we're going to look at calls because, again, that's the kind of outcome that we gear towards on Google ads. So whenever we go into the ad itself, or the ad campaign, I suppose, you can see we have calls. The other thing you might want to look at are local actions if you have your Google business profile linked with your Google ads profile or account. And so if you go to local actions, you can see that you might have local calls as well. The other place you may want to look at are your website. If you have any click to calls on your website, then that's another thing that you might want to check out. That would either be Google Analytics if you have that tied up in there, or depending on what kind of website builder you're using, that might track it for you. And so you might want to check all of that. I won't go over that because there's so many different website builders and so many ways of tracking click to calls or form submissions or emails or that kind of stuff that, it'd take forever to have to go through everything. But you might want to check your website as well to see if people are clicking and calling and submitting forms and whatever else. And as you can see here, this is getting calls. And so we know that this is working. And if you're not getting patients from that, then you might just not be answering the phone, right? You might not be answering the phones fast enough. There could be a bunch of stuff. I like to think of it like a pipeline and think of every single step that can occur from when they first see your ad to when they become a patient, basically. And so, you might think of it, they see your ad, they call you, right? You pick up the phone, you schedule an appointment, they come in for the appointment, and they become a patient. And so at any one of those stages, someone could be dropping off. In this case, we at least know that people are in fact calling. And so then we would want to look at some of those other stages to see if we are having any problems there. It's unlikely that advertising as a whole won't work for you or for chiropractors, right? It works for other chiropractors. It can probably work for you. It's just that we might have specific strategies that we're trying to use that aren't very successful, or we're not adding in all these steps and stuff we need to in order to get that full pipeline to work. And so again, that's where we troubleshoot all this stuff and we see what's working and what's not, and we try and fix what's not working. In this specific video, we're just going to be looking at Google ads and the front end of that pipeline. If you want more specific help with that, with the rest of the pipeline, I'll make more videos in the future, or if you want help now, then I'll leave a link at the top of the description and you can reach out and we can get to work on your business and fixing the pipeline for you. Otherwise, let's go ahead and move on to the next 2 tests, which are on how well your Google ads are working. This next test, it involves some super rough math, but it's basically to see whether or not your ads are reaching enough people, and that can tell us whether or not your targeting is off. So what you'd want to do is you want to get a couple numbers. The first one you'd want to get are the number of people in your city. And then after that, you'll want to get the square miles of the city. So then what you're going to do is you're going to divide the number of people by the square miles of the city. And this will give you a rough number. So let's say our people are 500,000 and our square miles of city is 100. And so in this case, let's say we have 500,000 people in a city and we have 100 square miles of that city. And so in this case, we have 5,000 people per square mile. This is like really rough math. Again, it's not meant to be perfect or anything. But after that, we would go to the Google Ads dashboard and we'd go to your ad and we would see what kind of location setting you have. So in this case, you can see that it's showing to people within 10 miles of your business. And so again, we go back to our math and I would just take this number and I would just multiply it by the radius that we are showing people to. And so in this case, we have 50,000. After that, we would take this number and we would multiply it by the average percentage of people who usually get chiropractic care. And so in this case, that's usually 7%. I mean, sometimes you'll see stuff as low as like 5% or as high as 15%. I like to go 7%. That's just me. So what that gives us is 3,500 people. Now this can usually fluctuate. Like I said, you might see some estimates of 5% and some other estimates of like 15%. And so sometimes this can fluctuate. Usually the most you'll see it fluctuate is plus or minus 2,000. At least that's the most I've seen it fluctuate. And so you might see about 6,000 one week, and then you might see about 1,000 a different week. It just kind of depends on how many people are searching for it, what other kind of competition you're seeing in terms of Google ads, how efficient your ads are that specific week, that kind of stuff. Once we have this number, we then go back to our Google ads. And like I said, this is usually what you're going to see per week. We'd go select a week over here on our time selector thing, and then we just check out impressions. And so you can see here, we're right in that ballpark. Impressions aren't exactly reach. So there's two different metrics. There's reach, which is the number of unique people that you're reaching, and impressions, which is the overall number of times people are seeing your stuff. And so in our calculations, we calculated for reach, and Google Ads shows you impressions, which aren't quite the same thing. But again, this is like super rough math to just kind of get a feel for whether or not our ads are actually seeing enough people. And this will give us a good idea of whether our ads are working correctly or whether they're not. So let's say you're getting calls, right? Let's say you're getting a lot of calls. It's possible that you're getting calls for people who are not qualified and they're not in your area. And so as an example, let's say you're targeting the US as a whole. Well, 7% of 365 million people is a lot, right? And so if you're seeing 7% of that, the chances of you getting more calls are pretty significant. And so you might be seeing so many calls that it's kind of unreasonable that you would expect to see that many calls in your local area. And so all those people, right, if you're in, South California, right, and someone from New York is calling, that person's very clearly not going to go to your chiropractic clinic. And so this just kind of gives us a good idea of whether or not we're seeing about how many people we should see. And that gives us a good idea of whether our targeting is off or not. And so you can see here in this example, in this account, our impressions are right in the ballpark of what we'd expect. And so this one, we have a pretty good idea, at least from our really back of napkin math, that we're seeing the right amount of people and our targeting is correct. If the numbers here are too low for you, for example, then you're either not spending enough or your targeting is incorrect. So I would check targeting first. I'd make sure your location is set correctly and it is set to around 7 to 15 miles, depending on how big your area is, right? If it's a bigger area with more people, then usually you can get away with smaller area targeting. And if it's a smaller area and you have, let's say like 3 different cities or towns that are all kind of near your one small town, then you might want to set something even larger, possibly even up to like 50 miles, right? If everyone just kind of travels to this one town to see you, and if you're kind of like one of the only chiropractors around, right, that might make sense. But usually for most people, it's 7 to 15 miles. The other thing to check is your search terms. And again, I would just make sure those are really broad, like chiropractor, back pain, neck treatment, those kind of stuff. And don't worry about really small, narrow search terms because you're already targeting a small local area. And so we don't want to then make that even smaller by targeting super small, narrow, niche search terms. Now, on the other hand, if your impressions are super, super high, as an example, if your impressions are 10 times our estimate, then you might be spending just a lot of money, but more likely your targeting is just off. And so you might be targeting search terms that are too broad. You might be targeting too broad of an area. And so you would want to narrow those a little bit to get people who are closer to your ideal market, to people who are looking for chiropractic care, for instance, who are close to your city, that kind of stuff. If we are right in the ballpark, then usually this means that the thing we would want to focus on is making our ads more efficient. Spending more won't mean that we reach more of our target market. It might mean we take some space from our competitors. It might mean that the people who are searching chiropractors see us multiple times as opposed to just once, but it doesn't mean that the people we're trying to reach aren't seeing us. And so if you have a lot of competitors in your area that you're trying to compete rather heavily against, then it might make more sense to compete, rather heavily against them and spend more money. But before I would think about doing any of that stuff, I would look at this next test, which tells us basically how efficient our ads are and how well they're overall working. And so let's go ahead and dive into that one. And that test is called LTV to CAC. So it's a ratio. And LTV is lifetime value, and CAC is cost to acquire a customer, or in this case, it would be cost to acquire a patient. And cost to acquire a customer is the average amount of ad spend that we are spending before we see a new patient come in. And lifetime value is the average amount of money that a patient will spend with you over the relationship with your practice. Let's go ahead and calculate this. So for LTV, we want to take our revenue and divide that by total patients. And this is over the same period of time. So you would take, for instance, monthly revenue, if we would take the revenue of, let's say, December, and we would take the total patients over that same December period, and we would divide that by each other. And then this will give us a number. And so as an example, let's say it's 500. Now, cost to acquire a customer, and you might also hear CPA, cost per acquisition, all the same thing, is total marketing spend, which in our case is total advertising. If you do any other kind of marketing stuff like social media costs for software, or if you hire someone to do that stuff, we would lump that in here as well. And this just gives us an overall better idea. But in our specific case, we can just go ahead and stick with how much money we're spending in Google Ads. And then we would divide this by the number of new patients. Again, we're keeping this over the same period. And so in this case, let's say it's $50. And so then we would want LTV to CAC to be at least 3 to 1, or ideally greater. So in this case, you can see our LTV to CAC ratio is 500 to 50, which is 10 to 1. And so this gives us an idea of how well our advertising is working, basically. And the reason we want 3 to 1 is because that usually allows us enough cash flow to continue to spend money on advertising and basically continue to be profitable and make money. And so in this case, we have 10 to 1, which is a good indication that our advertising is, one, working, or at least not losing us money overall, and two, is pretty efficient. If we have that kind of ratio with LTV to CAC, then what we can do is, like I said earlier, if you want to take more ad space from your competitors, then we could spend more. But if you're losing money on ads, then usually, obviously, you don't want to spend more money on ads. And so this is the kind of thing where this will tell us how well our ads are working overall. And if you are not seeing a 10 to 1 or 3 to 1 or above LTV to CAC ratio, the last video I made, which I will link up in the top right corner, was just about this and how we can improve that ratio. So that's all I have for you. Those are the 4 tests on if your ads are working and how well they're working. If you want custom help with stuff like this, I'll leave a link in the description below. And so you can click that and then reach out and we can see how we can help you with this kind of stuff. Otherwise, if you want to see that video on the LTV to CAC and how to improve that ratio, I'll leave it right here, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.